Meet the Maker today is with Mark Gittins, potter. Thank you so much for inviting us, Mark.
You're welcome.
But we thought we'd start doing just telling us how you came to be here. What's your journey to become a potter?
Okay, well, so I started making pots less than 3 years ago, but I guess I've been interested in creative things like my whole life, one thing and another. Although I did science at school and I did a sort of technical job, I've always had an interest in creative things, from music to various different kinds of art, printing, things like that. That all came and I was kind of looking around for something to do, and I knew I wanted to do something arty but also craft related, and I wanted to do something that involved things that people could use in their daily life, so not making things like pictures so much as doing things that were useful. And it was actually, my youngest daughter was doing ceramics at the time at university, and it just reminded me that my dad made pots when I was a kid, and I just decided to give it a go, and I had a sort of introductory class with my wife, but I took to it more than she did. It's something that it was particularly throwing on the wheel. I found it it's really difficult, and they make it look really easy, and I wanted to kind of work out how that worked. So
because I was going to ask, is it a difficult craft to learn?
For me, yeah, very much so. I'm left-handed, so someone would show, you'd see something on YouTube, or you'd see someone doing throwing and you'd think, okay, right, and then you'd see someone else doing it and you'd be like, why are they doing it differently? So I found, I was expecting it to be one way to throw, but it turns out that everyone kind of does a different thing, and after a while you realise that it's not what you're doing with your hands, it's what you're doing with the clay, but you have to learn how the clay works. So there's ever such a lot that can go wrong with pottery. There are so many stages that can go wrong and end up, you can have something that you really like, but you get to the end and it can be rubbish because a fault in the kiln or an issue or the problem with the glaze. So there's all sorts of things go wrong, and it's quite a hard hobby to have and persist with. But someone said, there's a wood-fired kiln. I didn't really know what that was, and I went to this group. Well, I joined, so that was kind of like, I wasn't expecting to do that, but I had a chainsaw, and there was someone had left, and so yeah, I just joined the wood-fired kiln without really knowing much about it. And pottery is quite a solo thing, so there's a social group, and there's also a lot of expertise, and there's also a kind of an aesthetic of wood firing, which is a certain kind of firing, which is you get dramatic effects. You have to make your own glazes because you can't use commercial glazes, because you have to be in charge of, you have to know exactly what's gone into the glaze. So it pushes you down a whole other route, which I found very appealing. I enjoy the aesthetic of it. I go to ceramic shows and I find that I'm not usually enthused by looking at electric fired work. They still don't seem to have the appeal of a really good wood-fired pot. So there's something special about a wood-fired pot, which I suppose reflects all the work and all the jeopardy that goes into making them. We buy wood from the Thoresby estate, who have a managed woodland, so they have a sawmill and they produce wood. And we buy the offcuts, so they're the bits of the tree that aren't suitable for making timber out of and whatnot. So the width of the kiln is, I can't remember, basically more or less a metre wide. So the pieces of wood have to be that length, more or less, to fit in. So we chainsaw them into sections, and then we split them with hammers and axes, which is a huge amount of work, and we stack them to dry. So they usually take 6 months to a year to fully season. So you have to make your pots and get them ready and all that sort of stuff, and then we take them usually on the Friday before firing, and then currently I'm the nominated person to climb into the kiln, which it's quite a physically difficult thing to do, but I climb in the kiln, they pass me the pots, I stack them, and there's usually probably a couple of 100 pots in. There's a lot of pots in the kiln. Yeah. And then on firing day, again, I'm usually one of the people who lights the kiln.
Morning, Mark. This is terrible weather.
Yeah.
So what effect does that have on the firing?
Well, strictly speaking, not that much. The rain, obviously, because we're under cover and it's a fire. So, but the wind direction and the general conditions, there's not much wind. We could do with wind blowing in the front, but it's more to do with the people getting wet,
Yeah.
feeling a bit miserable about things, but we're going to fire anyway. So
Yeah, we're going to get this fire going anyway.
yeah. We light, initially we have a fire at the front, and it's called candling when you just basically warm the kiln up. So we start a fire out here, and we gradually, over a few hours, we build the fire up and we build up the ash bed, and once we get to a certain temperature we start loading from the side.
You can just make out the pots in the corner that you were loading up yesterday. Looking very exciting.
So what we need to do is we build a fire up very gradually, and when we get to a certain temperature we start side loading about 300 degrees. So we brick up the front, leave some holes for airflow, and then we feed the wood in through the side, and then the wood lands on steel bars and the flames are a bit higher, and that's when we properly sort of get going with firing. And it takes normally, the last one was 13 hours, but normally it's about 10 hours.
We
it depends
put the kiln
on
into
your
the
direction. Really.
It's a long day.
It is a long day, yeah. The wood-fired kiln that I use is very variable on the day. It can be one thing or another. It can be hotter or colder, the atmospheric conditions, if it's raining, if the wind's blowing in one direction as opposed to the other, if the wood's particularly damp or whatever, it can be different. So every pot that comes out of the wood-fired kiln is kind of more or less a one-off. So when they work, they're absolutely fantastic, and you're really pleased with them. And then other times it can be disappointing. So there's a lot that can go wrong.
So what's the difference in terms of the kinds of glazes that you use in it?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different glazes. They're mostly based on, a lot of the recipes are based on sort of old Chinese and Japanese recipes, because they were the kind of sort of the masters of wood firing, and they kind of took ceramics to a level that was very influential, and it became the sort of standard that people in Europe were trying to achieve. So we use, we have to make our own glazes, because you need to know what's gone into them. So certain things in glazes like copper will tend to vaporise and spread to other pots. So we don't use copper because that could influence someone else's pots. We don't use chrome for the same reason. So we have to know what's gone into them. So there's all sorts of different ones, and they're based on old recipes. So they've got names like Tenmuko, which is a high iron glaze, and it's all trial and error. You, as I say, you think. You can go wrong with a glaze. You can turn a really nice pot into something horrible by a badly applied or a badly designed glaze. So they have to melt at a certain temperature. They have to melt. They call high fire glazes. They have to melt at kind of 10 or 12. And often the challenge in that kiln is to get it hot enough throughout the kiln. That's the main challenge we face. So when we get to a certain temperature, it becomes necessary to wear safety goggles so that you don't get problems with your eyes when you load the wood in. So we're ready, Jenny?
Yeah.
Oh, it's terrifying thought.
Yes, you don't want anything to go wrong there, do you? You might just do
Absolutely.
one or two.
Critical moment, really.
Yeah.
So very slowly we build up the fire over a few hours. We have pyrometers in there. We have things called pyrometric cones that melt at certain temperatures. Cone 6, cone 8, cone 10 and cone 12. And they basically melt at different temperatures, so they bend over. So it's not really temperature, it's what's called heat work. So it's the amount of heat that's gone into the pottery over time. So if it goes, the specification is more or less 1300 degrees for cone 12, but that's based on a certain increase in temperature over the last 2 hours. So when the cones bend, that's when you're done.
Did they hear somewhere that the ash from the wood itself contributes to the glaze?
Yeah, so I believe that the first sort of glazes that were made were by accident, which was in these old wood-fired kilns thousands of years ago when the ash landed on the clay. So the ash acts as what they call a flux, so it melts the clay and forms a glass. So the silica in clay, sand, and that will melt and form a glass when the flux from the ash lands on it. So a lot of the glazes that we make are ash glazes, so we will use ash from the kiln or from people's wood burners or whatever, and you can make up glazes that are quite nice, you know, from ash. But also the ash from the fire, from the kiln, will contribute.
On the day itself?
Yeah, on the day itself. So it will form a lot of interest, a lot of visual interest on the so you can see the speckles on here. These are formed by ash landing on it. The first thing you'll have to learn is to centre. So you throw the clay on the wheel head in the middle, and then you try and centre it. And people, you go to see people doing it, and they're sort of almost in tears. You know, they're like, it won't centre, and they spend like half an hour trying to centre it or something. By which time the clay is completely ruined, and you couldn't throw anything with it because it's all been overworked. And then once you can do it, you wonder why it was ever difficult. So it's not something. There's a sort of an understanding of it, but it's definitely a physical thing that you have to learn.
Muscle memories kind of thing.
Yeah, completely. So when if you go away for if you take a break from throwing, you go on holiday, or you just take a break for whatever reason, when you come back to it, it feels quite alien for a moment, and then it sort of clicks back in. Yeah, and you have bad days, you know. So you think, hey, okay, I can throw a pot, and you put something, and then some days it's just like, and you know, I think from talking to other people, you have to. That's that for the day. You just have to walk away and say, it'll come back tomorrow. So if you start getting angry about things, then that's it. You can't never. You know that you've had it. So you have to kind of take a bit of a breath, and maybe you'll be able to pick it up. But best maybe to just go away and come back the next day. Right. So I've got 350 grams of clay, and I'm basically going to throw the mug.
Fantastic.
Okay. Harder to take it in once it's gone out, so you have to obviously learn this, and this is why I think if I'd had the chance to work or to be sort of taught by people in person, more throwers early on, that would have been helpful, but at the end of the day you have to teach yourself, you have to learn yourself, so you find your own way to doing it. But yes, I mean, I still watch videos and I still wonder how people throw things that I'm trying to throw, and it's practice, you've got to keep doing it. There we go.
What happens next?
Right, well, this one for a mug, you would leave it to dry until it's what they call leather hard, or I normally work with them. I like to work with them when they're a little bit softer than most people probably, and then but you let it set for a while until you can handle it, and then you put a handle on it. So you get another piece of clay, you pull. There's different ways of doing it. Some people cut them or extrude them. I pull the handle, so I get a piece of clay and I wet my hand and I pull down and down and down until I get a sort of stub about that long, and then I scratch the surface and wet it, or put clay slip on it, and then I'd stick the handle on, and then I lift the mug up and I pull it again until it's the right shape that I like the look of, and then I bend it around and stick it onto the bottom.
Do I see in the best traditions of these things, there's one you made earlier?
Here's one I made earlier. So yeah, I like, so perhaps this one's maybe even too, I like to see, different people have different aesthetics, but I like to see the hand of the people who made things on it. So I like to pull them quite quickly, and if they go wrong, they go wrong. And I like to see where they've just been joined quite simply and unfussily. Different, as I say, different people have different styles that they like, but I like it to look like it was made by someone's hands, and I like to see the look of their hands on it. So I leave finger marks on it where I've pushed it on at the end.
And then the one we're looking at now has been biscuit fired?
No, this is clay. If I
that's
put that in a
clay.
bucket of water, it would, or even just wet it slightly, it would just turn back to clay. When they're biscuit fired, they were this clay is a much more orangey colour, and it would be harder. If you could break this quite easily just by knocking it. Once it's biscuit fired, it's quite a lot more robust. So this is, if I decided that I didn't like this, or something about it, or it was too heavy, or the bottom was too light or something, I just put it in a bucket of water and turn it back into clay and rework it, which is really good, you know, that you can do that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure meeting you and talking with you.
Yeah, thank you.